to 30 hours. And the 30 hours per week is working very well, providing assistance in the Office of Fire Prevention, because there's someone there more frequently while the FBO is out doing inspections. So phone calls are getting answered, calls are getting returned, schedules are getting made. So what I've asked to do is increase by 10 hours a week the hours of the Fire Prevention Secretary. So the cost associated with those additional 10 hours is about $6,000.
Would that include benefits, Chief?
That position does not have benefits.
Period, even with 40 hours?
It will work 30 hours.
You said
It presently works 20. For the rest of the year, because we had some savings, we're now having the person work 30 hours. But when we go to January 1, there's no money budgeted for 30 hours. That position will go back to 20 until this budget.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going to do 10 and then another 10. I'm sorry. I lost the cog there. Okay, so I'm all set. Go ahead, Chief. I'm sorry.
Supplies and equipment. Supplies changed less than $1,000, but it looks like a 5 or 6% increase because it's a small dollar amount. As we go on to the next page, training, there are no dollar changes. As we go on to communications, look at the first two lines, regular wages and overtime wages. There looks to be like a disparity in the change between the two lines. Fire alarm operators are not exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act, so for all hours worked in excess of 40 hours in a particular work week, we're required by law to pay them at an overtime rate. The fire alarm operators work the same work schedule as the firefighters. So prior to the current collective bargaining agreement, they were paid for 13 weeks at 34 hours, they were paid for 13 weeks at 38 hours, and they were paid for 26 weeks at 48 hours. With the change in work schedule, they're now paid for 13 weeks at 24 hours and 39 weeks at 48 hours. So there were fewer weeks that they were paid at the regular wage line and more weeks that they're paid from the overtime wage line. Telephone, radio maintenance, none of the other lines changed. Rentals and leases decreased a little bit because we changed some of our service agreements. Under repair services, there are no changes. The cost transfer line, that's a line that was put here for previous years. It will not impact this year's budget. Fire stations and buildings, electric remains unchanged. Heating, fuel, water, building maintenance, essentially all the other lines associated with the fire stations and buildings for this year remain unchanged, bringing us again back to that bottom line at the manager's level of $3,295,347, and that's the budget for 2013.
Thank you. Questions for the Chief, Mr. Pierce?
Oh, I'll jump right in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the beginning here, if I can find my page 71 or 73, Mike. You've explained quite a few. I did have a little question mark on the holiday pay on page 71. It's at 872 versus around 7-ish% for most of the other categories that were affected by the union contracts. Am I missing something there?
No, that percentage is correct.
And why would that be slightly different than, say, the 7 or 7.29 on the next page for various things like that?
It depends on what's included in the wage for that calculation, the number of holidays that occurred during the actual year. For example, an election year would change the number of holidays in that particular year.
Like tomorrow, for example.
Tomorrow's not a holiday. Not under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay. Right. Probably isn't. Right.
So those things tend to change a little bit. The way these are calculated are based on actual wage, where some of the other lines, incentives are broken out. So there's a few things that that affect the overall calculation.
I was just curious why that sort of was a little higher than the rest, not that it was a big deal. I have a couple more.
And that's really a change from last year. Last year could have been a little under budgeted.
Okay. That probably happens once in a while, too, when we're trying to do it all, keep it all pretty snug. I'm looking at this replacement equipment on page 77. It's 79 for you, probably. And you were talking about the fire suppression with the technical hazards and so forth. I know that we have what they call mutual aid for fire suppression and fires and that sort of thing in the ambulance. When it comes to this hazardous thing, you say we have a community. Are there certain things that each town is responsible for, like item A for Hampton and item B for Hampton Falls and item C for Northampton, or we all have a little bit of everything? How does that work?
Not exactly. We all participate in a regional response team.
Okay.
Communities have the option of providing members to the team if the members are adequately trained, but essentially all the equipment belongs to the team and falls under the jurisdiction of the Seacoast Chiefs Mutual Fire Aid Association.
Okay, so then, if I understood you correctly, then if we buy some goodies here for this particular group, then hopefully Seabrook or Northampton, whoever would be buying something else we need to make that facility better, or that organization better.
Not necessarily. We don't provide equipment to the response team.
Okay, that's
They
from the
purchase,
town.
right,
Okay.
that equipment for the regional response is all cached together, responds together as a unit.
Okay,
We only provide the equipment that we need for the initial response.
okay.
Once we've gone beyond that initial response level, we call the outside resource. They
Okay.
bring all the more specialized equipment.
That's the part I was a little fuzzy. Then
We have to maintain some equipment for that initial response.
Oh, I
Usually
appreciate that.
controlling spills, detection, identification of products.
We're getting more sensitive to that stuff I know nowadays, Chief, especially with the environment being more the front of the picture. I just have one more question on the very next page. You talked about getting some software to keep track of this data that you're given by different companies. Does that mean you're going to be buying some new computers and so forth?
Negative.
Not
That's
necessarily.
not the plan. And
Okay.
computer costs don't necessarily come from my budget.
Okay. The reason why I ask is because I'm always looking for old computers. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm looking at page 79, the part-time wages again. You talked about the 82%. You explained that. I'm all happy with that. I have one more on the next page. I think I'm pretty well wrapped. I think it has more of the way things are done rather than what it is, dollar-wise. Yeah, here it is, over here. Yeah, what the overtime rates on page 83, which is 85 for you, is, and I'm looking at 5.140, and you explain that about how the contracts have them working a 24-hour shift, and these people are working. Are they working a 24-hour shift also?
Correct, yes.
So then, the question becomes for us, I suppose, you for the chief, would be, how do we make that work in relation to the contract? And so the only way we can do it is basically have them work the same hours, and you end up with them getting paid some significant overtime because of the way the whole thing is set up.
And
Really?
for several weeks, they get paid for fewer than 40 hours.
Right. We had a similar problem when we had the 10-hour thing. We had some more
It was
issues.
same, but the split was different then.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, that helps me out there, Chief. Thank you very much. And I think I'm almost done. Let me make sure I didn't miss any little notes over here as we're going along. That does it. Thank you very much, Chief. That does it for me.
Mr. Nichols?
Yeah, sure, I have a couple.